Hey, faithful listener. Thanks for tuning in to the P40 Ministries Daily Podcast. This podcast is dedicated to helping you grow spiritually so you can grow personally. Let's grow together by building a consistent Bible reading routine. This is Jen, your host, and today we will be discussing the book of Mark. Happy Thursday, friends and faithful listeners. Thank you so much for tuning into the P40 Ministries podcast. And I am your host, Jen here. And Bandit is here with me as well. He is sitting under my desk. He has found a new spot right at my feet. And it's both cute, but also frustrating because I can't move my chair in and out of my desk. But I am allowing him to sit here with me and sleep at my feet and listen to me do a podcast episode. So friends, let's go ahead and talk about Mark 6 today, verses 30 through 44. And I will be reading out of the WEB version, as I always do, but please feel free to read out of whatever version you prefer to read out of this morning. Grab that cup of coffee and let's go ahead and read. The apostles gathered themselves together to Jesus, and they told him all things, whatever they had done and whatever they had taught. He said to them, "You come apart into a deserted place and rest a while." For there were many coming and going, that they had no leisure so much as to eat. They went away in the boat to a deserted place by themselves. They saw them going, and many recognized him and ran there on foot from all the cities. They arrived before them and came together to him. And Jesus came out, saw a great multitude, and he had compassion on them, because they were like sheep without a shepherd. And he began to teach them many things. When it was late in the day, his disciples came to him and said, "This place is deserted, and it is late in the day. Send them away, that they may go into the surrounding country and villages, and buy themselves bread, for they have nothing to eat." But he answered them, "You give them something to eat." And they asked him, "Shall we go and buy 200 denarii worth of bread and give them something to eat?" And he said to them, "How many loaves do you have? Go and see." When they knew, they came back and said, 5 and 2 fish. And he commanded them that everyone should sit down in groups on the green grass. And they sat down in ranks, by hundreds and by 50s. And he took 5 loaves and the 2 fish, and looking up to heaven, he blessed and broke the loaves. And he gave them to his disciples who sat before him, and he divided the 2 fish among them all. They all ate and were filled. They took up the 12 baskets full of broken pieces and also of the fish, and those who ate the loaves were 5,000 men. This is one of Jesus' most famous miracles, I think, that he ever performed, which is the feeding of the 5,000. Now, of course, there probably were more than 5,000 people there. We call it the feeding of the 5,000 because there were approximately 5,000 men that had gotten fed along with women and children. So there could have been 10,000 people, there could have been 12,000 people, who knows, but there was a lot of people there. So here in verse 30, it talks about how the apostles came back to Jesus. You remember in the last time that we were talking about this, the apostles had gotten sent out because Jesus had sent them out into basically everywhere, all the Jewish communities, to teach about Jesus and about the Messiah and how they should all repent and turn from their sins. So they got sent out, and Jesus had told them from the beginning, trust completely in God. Don't even take any money with you. Don't take an extra coat. Just take your walking stick and go. So that's what the disciples did, and they went around and they were completely fine. They were fully taken care of by God. They were able to find places to sleep for free. People brought them into their houses and fed them. And so they went out and they were healing many sicknesses, it said. And they were also casting out demons and just doing different miracles that Jesus had given them to do. So they were able to do many of the same miracles that Jesus was able to do. So it says now in verse 30 that the apostles came back. So who knows how long they were gone? A few months, maybe a year. I don't know. They were gone for a while probably, but it says that they came back to Jesus and they told him everything that they had done. and whatever they had taught. So they were going back to Jesus, talking to him about everything that they were doing, probably excited about the miracles that they were able to perform, and maybe just excited about the experiences they were having, traveling together and without Jesus. This was their first test run without their teacher going with them. So they were probably very excited to go back to Jesus and tell them everything that they did. So then afterwards, he says to the disciples, and he says, okay, how about we go to a deserted place to rest, because he heard about all the travels that the disciples had done and probably how tired they were. And in fact, it says here that they were so tired they didn't even have any leisure to eat. And I don't know if you guys pronounce it leisure or leisure. I guess I switched between the two. They had no leisure to eat. But anyway, it says that they were so busy between Jesus and the apostles and the disciples going out and preaching and teaching and healing and whatever else they were doing that they didn't even get a spare moment to eat. So Jesus is like, okay, we need a vacation. We are tired. We got to go to a deserted place and, let's go and let's just relax for a little bit and all that kind of stuff. So Jesus decides to go on a vacation with his disciples just to get away for a little bit. So it says that they went away in a boat to a deserted place by themselves. But remember, Jesus always had a crowd around him. He was always bringing in crowds. So it says that the people saw him going into the boat, and many people, maybe even on the water, because, it probably wasn't a very big sea that they were crossing. Many people in the water recognized Jesus, and they're like, look, that's Jesus over there in that boat. So now all these people are hearing that Jesus is going to this deserted place. So these people are all running there on foot. And in fact, they got to the place before Jesus even got there. So Jesus gets off the boat, and it says that he saw a huge multitude. And even though he wanted to have rest and relaxation, this is what it says. He saw a great multitude, and he had compassion on them because they were like sheep without a shepherd. So he began to teach them many things. So this is how cool Jesus is. Even though he wanted to go to a vacation and rest and relax with his disciples and just teach them for a little bit, he saw the people there, kind of cramping his style a little bit, but he allowed it to happen, and he had compassion on them. And rather than it getting to him and him being like, okay, let's go somewhere else, he had compassion on them, and he taught them many things, is what it says. And then he performs this huge miracle for them. So the funny thing about this is, when I go on a vacation, I don't want anybody to bother me. Okay, that's my vacation. That's my time I have to get away for a little bit. So anything that goes mildly wrong is just the worst thing in the world to me. I don't want anything to go wrong on my vacations, right? But Jesus is so different from us that even though he's going to get away, he's not allowing this to upset him. Rather, he's allowing the people who were lost, he's allowing them to come near to him to hear what he has to say. And, Jesus has compassion on them. And I mean, I definitely couldn't say the same thing. If people were following me to my vacation place, I'd be like, oh my gosh, please go away. But anyway, so it says here that he began to teach them many things. And when it was late in the day, so this was all day. Jesus probably went in the morning, he's teaching these people, and it's all day. He's probably exhausted. So it says that his disciples came to him, and they're like, okay, so everybody's hungry, and this place is deserted, it's late, and you need to send these crowds away because we all need to eat. We're all starving. So the disciples are like, okay, send them away so that they can go into the surrounding country and villages and marketplaces and whatever else and buy themselves bread because they have nothing to eat. They ran here on foot. They've got nothing to eat. So Jesus is like, well, why don't you give them something to eat? And so snarkily, they respond. They're like, what are we going to do? Go and buy 200 denarii worth of bread and give them something to eat? So they're kind of like irritated at Jesus, and they're like, what do you expect us to do? Should we go and buy them, 8 months worth of pay, food for all these people? Why should we do that? So then Jesus is like, well, why don't you go into the crowds and see how many loaves they have? So go and see. So the disciples go into the crowds, and if they find out, and we find out later on it was from a little boy's lunch, that there was only in this entire crowd, because you remember, these were very poor people. You have to remember that the people that Jesus taught were very, very poor. Many of them probably didn't have a meal in who knows how long. And these were all very modest families that would be coming to see Jesus, at least primarily very modest people. So it says at this point that they find out that one little boy had a lunch on him out of the tons of people that were there, at least one little boy that was willing to share. And it says that they had 5 loaves and 2 fish. So this little boy was a generous little boy that wanted to give Jesus his lunch. Isn't that cute? That is so adorable. The little boy gave Jesus his lunch. So the little boy gives Jesus the lunch. And so Jesus, it says, blesses the bread. So he says a prayer before the meal. And it says at this point, he begins breaking the loaves off into little pieces. As he's breaking them, I don't know how this miracle took place, but more and more bread is forming in his hands, and he just keeps breaking the same loaves, I guess, along with the fish. So God up in heaven is certainly blessing this meal that Jesus just blessed, and is multiplying this bread for these tons and tons of people here that are, with Jesus. So it says that there was so much food that Jesus was able to feed the entire crowd. And it says that he commanded everyone should sit down in groups on the green grass. So I think that that is kind of cool because Jesus commanded them to all share a meal together. Jesus, I believe, is really big on community. He's always eating with people. He's always feeding people. He's always sitting down with people. And I think that that's very, very important for us to recognize about Jesus is that he is very community and people minded. And since Jesus is our greatest model, we are also supposed to model that and focus on our communities and focus on the people within our communities. I think that that is very, very important. So when Jesus commands them to sit down on the green grass, he's commanding them all to eat together. And so that's exactly what they do. They sit down and they fellowship and they eat together and they're enjoying each other's company and sharing a meal with Jesus. And it says that they sat down in ranks by hundreds and fifties. So all these people are sitting down and meeting new people and fellowshipping. So then it says here, in verse 43, they took up 12 baskets full of broken pieces and also of the fish. And before that, the people were eating everything that they wanted. This food was getting passed down in these baskets. Jesus had his disciples go and feed all these people. And, Jesus is teaching what it means here to be a leader as well, because he's commanding that his disciples eat last, in a sense, because he's having his disciples who would be the leaders of that group, and Jesus himself. And Jesus also was eating last because he's the one breaking off all the pieces for all the people. So he's showing his disciples that that is what leaders do. Leaders eat last. So the disciples have to serve everybody else before they are allowed to serve themselves. And it says that after the disciples served everybody, which, by the way, this would have been a ton of people, and this could have taken who knows how long, maybe an hour to pass out all that food. I don't know, for as many people as there were, that would have taken a long time between 12 disciples. So the disciples had to stay hungry until the very end. And this was probably a huge learning lesson for these disciples, which not only they get their vacation interrupted, but also now they're not even allowed to eat first. And we see many times throughout scriptures, the disciples asking Jesus, about being first and who's going to be the first among us and, who's going to sit at your right hand. They ask Jesus stuff like that all the time, but Jesus was always modeling that leaders eat last. And it's funny that I'm actually reading a book right now called Leaders Eat Last. And it's not a Christian book at all. It's actually about CEOs and business and stuff like that. But it's very true. Right here, Jesus ate last. And I find that very interesting. So if we are going to be leaders in our communities, I think the one thing we can take away from this is any of us that want to be leaders have to eat last, if that makes sense. Every single one of us have to serve other people first. I'm actually going to be having a guest speaker on the podcast, I believe next week or the week after. And his name is Ray Byrne. And he came and spoke at our church, and he's a church planting pastor. And one of the sermons he came and spoke at our church recently was called Everyone Picks Up Trash. And it is based on Walt Disney. When Walt Disney made his theme park at the beginning, he had a motto which was everyone picks up trash. So you can see pictures of Walt Disney, who, we would never think of Walt Disney as somebody that was going around picking up litter and trash from, the customers that came in, but he would. And that was his motto, that even leaders pick up trash. And Jesus is kind of displaying this right here, that leaders have to be last. They have to put themselves last. And Jesus even says that in the Bible, that those who want to be first are going to be last, and those who are last are someday going to be first. So that is what Jesus is demonstrating here and all throughout this entire thing. And I think that is something we can take away from that to this day. So friends, this was Mark chapter 6, verses 30 through 44, one of the most famous portions of scripture in the Bible. So if you liked this episode, please rate it 5 stars, subscribe or follow the podcast, and also share it on your social media platforms. And that will help the podcast get found by a lot more people. That is one of the best things you can do, is to rate a podcast if you like it and if you want it to continue to flourish. Because Google and Apple and all the other podcast platforms out there look at those reviews, and the more reviews a podcast has, the more they're going to bump it up in the ratings. And so this is a great way, as odd as this sounds, to spread the gospel, is to rate a podcast that you like, a biblical podcast. So friends and faithful listeners, please rate the P40 Ministries podcast and share it on your social media platforms so that more and more people can find it. But friends, please have a wonderful rest of your day. Happy listening, and God bless.